Solemnities are the highest degree of liturgical celebration, and as such are reserved for the most important mysteries of the faith. And therefore, since the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary is a solemnity, it follows that it must contain within it one of the most important mysteries of the faith for us to explore. And so it does. But before we consider that mystery, let's consider the Assumption of Our Lady in the context of salvation history. The Assumption of Mary has always been believed by the Church. As early as 377 AD, Saint Epiphanius of Salamis wrote that no one knew whether Mary had died or not. And accounts of Mary's Assumption have been found from the 4th century. Some of these accounts place the Assumption in Ephesus, in Mary's own house, surrounded by the apostles. In 1950, Pope Pius XII's declaration that the Assumption was a dogma of the faith, and in his official declaration he stated, "By the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, of the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own authority, we pronounce, declare, and define it to be a divinely revealed dogma, that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever-Virgin Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory." And though non-Catholics deny there is any scriptural basis for the Assumption, Pope Pius XII begs to differ. "All proofs," he wrote, "and considerations of the Holy Father and the theologians on the Assumption are based upon the sacred writings as their ultimate foundation," unquote. The Pope cited 1 Corinthians 15, in which St. Paul alludes to Genesis 3:15, where it is prophesied that the seed of the woman will crush Satan with his feet. And also he refers to Psalm 8, verse 6, where it says, "You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You have put everything under their feet." Since then, Jesus ascended to heaven to fulfill this prophecy, being the seed of the woman. It follows that the woman herself would have a similar end, since she shared this enmity with Satan. The Pope also mentioned Psalm 132, a psalm commemorating the return of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and lamenting its subsequent loss years later. The second half of the psalm says that the loss will be recompensed in the new covenant. And since Mary is the Ark of the new covenant, in that she carried our Lord in her very womb, it follows that she was taken into heaven in the same manner as our Lord, that is, body and soul. In Revelation 12, the woman clothed with the sun, whom John the Apostle saw in his vision from the island of Patmos, also attests to the doctrine of the Assumption. And finally, though not cited in Pope Pius' scriptural basis for Mary's Assumption, I find it noteworthy that God had performed the miracle of the Assumption before, twice before, in fact. Mary was not the first person assumed into heaven. In the Old Testament book of Genesis, the holy man Enoch was assumed into heaven, and Elisha witnessed Elijah's assumption into heaven in a fiery chariot. So, what is the sacred mysteries of the faith that the Assumption reflects? According to Bishop Magnani, Bishop Emeritus of Treviso, Italy, the Assumption of Mary is very properly situated as one of the glorious mysteries of the Rosary, because it reflects the reality of her constant ascension towards heaven. Full of grace from the very moment of her conception on this earth, Mary Immaculate never ceased to grow in grace before God. Her assumption into heaven, then, is a logical and fitting end for which she was destined by God. And what a destiny! Immaculately conceived, she became the Mother of God, loved, nurtured, and raised the incarnate Son of God, was wounded in her heart as no one else has ever been save our Lord himself, when she saw him suffering and dying on the cross. And then she continued to love, nurture, and raise her Son's church after our Lord's resurrection and ascension, for she also is the mother of the church. One of the mysterious truths of the faith contained in the Assumption, then, is Mary's constant ascension towards heaven. Since Mary was our Lord's very first disciple, we should imitate her in all things. And that's a question for us. Are we? Are we imitating her in all things? Are we in a constant ascension towards heaven? And I don't mean merely in the passage of time, but rather, do we consider heaven our true home? You can tell whether we are ascending towards heaven, as it were, by thinking about what we're attached to. What is it that we do with most of our free time? What is it that's most important to us? What is it that we really care about? What is it that we are willing to work, suffer, and pour out our lives for? If we say, make a list, and nothing about God, our faith, or virtue is high on the list, then we need to assess our priorities. Now, we all have different vocations in life, and I'm not saying we're to walk around with hands folded looking up to heaven all day long. Mary didn't do that. Neither did the saints, and neither should you or I. Mary had certain tasks she needed to complete on earth. They were all necessary, fitting, and holy. But Mary also transcended the earth. Even while she lived on the earth, she transcended it in a very real way through her holy life, and in a very literal way by being the God-bearer, the Theotokos. In the way she lived her life, she brought heaven to earth. And when Mary's mission on earth was complete, when she was detached, if you will, from all God willed that she do on earth, she rose to heaven by the power of God. It's the same for us. There are many tasks we have been given here on earth. None as sublime as the task entrusted to the Blessed Virgin Mary, but they're just as necessary, fitting, and as holy as those who have been entrusted to our care. And while God has given us many things to enjoy here on earth, we should not give our hearts to any of them. Our heart is to belong to Him alone. Like Mary, the way we live our lives should bring heaven to earth. And since heaven is the presence of God, to the extent that you and I manifest His presence in our lives, to that extent, we constantly ascend toward heaven, even while we live on earth. To that extent, we bring heaven to earth.